Hi, my name is Josh Gottry. Welcome to my weekly lesson. This is an opportunity to briefly present a piece, discuss a topic, address a technique, or explore a musical concept. Today we're going to look briefly at scales. Scales are not something we typically look at as, oh goody, let's practice our scales, but certainly they have extensive application opportunities to the music we play, and therefore really serve as a foundation for everything we do musically. A couple things we want to look at. First of all, scales are simply a group of notes, typically that allow us to narrow our focus a little bit more specifically within the set of 12 notes that exist in an octave to something perhaps a little bit more manageable, often 7 diatonic pitches within a major or minor key or within a mode. Most of you certainly have probably practiced your scales or needed to do scales for auditions or school requirements or things like that. But certainly beyond that, there's important concepts that we need to know to be able to apply those scales. So let's first of all just take a look at a couple major scales that you might be familiar with, and then we'll talk about the application of those scales beyond just playing them in exercises. So for example, probably the first scale you ever learned is B flat major scale. So here we go. Okay, simple enough. We've played it. We play it 2 octaves. So one of the biggest reasons to play all your scales 2 octaves or more on a keyboard percussion instrument is it allows you to play the scale with both potential stickings. If I start the scale with my right hand, as I start the second octave, I'm starting it with my left hand. Down with the right hand, and then down with the left hand. Okay, so there's the first thing, is allows us to play the scale right-handed and left-handed by playing at 2 octaves. I typically recommend to go ahead and play with that straight 8th note pattern as opposed to what you may have seen in some band situations with a quarter note or a longer note on the root of the scale. Simply just because not all scales are presented in music in a context where we stop on the root of that scale. So playing in straight 8th notes allows us to play it a little bit more rapidly and allows us to play it without the interruption at the midpoint of the scale, which is not always the case. So with that scale, the B flat scale, there's a couple things that we can know. Number one, that is a scale that includes flats, specifically 2 flats, B flat and E flat. So anytime you encounter a piece with the key signature of 2 flats, B flat and E flat, you will find that that piece is either in B flat major or one of the relative scales to B flat major, for example, G minor, that also uses 2 flats, or maybe a modal scale like C Dorian, which uses those same 2 flats. If you know your scales and can play your scales, that's great, but if you don't have the correlation to the key signature in the piece, you don't necessarily get the benefit of that scale awareness. So you could practice your B flat scale 100 hours a week and never be able to apply that scale in a context if you don't also know that the 2 flat key signature applies to that set of notes. Now I mentioned G minor using the same key signature. Realize that for every major scale there's a correlating minor scale that uses the exact same set of pitches, just starting in a different place. So if I play the B flat major scale but I run that scale from G to G, I'm playing the G minor scale. Again, I'm using straight 8th notes, playing at least 2 octaves, so I get the opportunity to play the scale starting with both hands and use a greater range of the instrument. Certainly, practicing the scales that you work on full range is a good idea as well. use the full range of your instrument. That way you're not stuck on one particular root or one particular note that is your change of direction. So in this case, if I were to play this scale full range, I could either start or end on B flat or G, the two most common modes that might incorporate this key signature. But then I'd play the full range of the instrument, which would allow me to stop on the F on top and the F on bottom, and then I still would come back to that same pitch I started on. So for this situation, I'm going to go ahead and start on B flat, play the full range up, and then back down to F, and then return to B flat to finish the scale. And you'll notice that as I'm playing this scale, I'm trying to keep my feet as stationary as possible. As soon as you go beyond 2 octaves, there's usually going to have to be at least one shift or adjustment of the feet, but we want to avoid shifting every couple notes. Something like this is unnecessary. We don't need to move our feet for every few pitches. We want to make sure that for anything within a couple octaves, we pretty much keep our feet stationary. More than that might require one shuffle or one step or lean to the side or the other, and that will help increase our accuracy by minimizing the change of relationship from our body to the pitches itself, because obviously as we move, the instrument does not. So every time we move our feet or move our body, our perception of where the notes that we're shooting for does change somewhat. So how many scales should you know? Well, ideally you should know all 12 major scales and then relate your minor scales and your modes to that, and then explore some of the non-diatonic scales, for example, a blues scale, octatonic scale, and then of course your chromatic scale, whole tone scale, and other intervals like that comprise groups of pitches. So chromatic scale, of course, every note on the keyboard. Whole tone scale is every other pitch, something like this. And there's actually only one chromatic scale because it uses every note. There's 2 whole tone scales, the one starting on C and then the one starting on C sharp. There's, of course, 12 diatonic major or minor scales, one for each pitch, and so on and so forth. Lots of different options of things to explore. As you practice your scale, certainly don't limit yourself to starting or ending on tonic all the time. Sometimes the best idea is to pick another note to start on or end on, just to keep yourself thinking, well, how might this apply in real life? Most music doesn't always start or end on tonic for every melodic phrase, for every embellishing idea. And so practicing moving to or from say the 3rd scale degree or the 4th scale degree of the scale can also increase your familiarity. You can also play in octaves or other things to mix it up a little bit. The more variety, the better, and certainly the more scales you know, the better. Hopefully that helps, and I'll see you again for another weekly lesson soon.